so we should be on. All right, there we go. Well, good afternoon, everyone.
Good
It's
afternoon.
Wednesday afternoon, 12:30. It's time for Lunch and Learn. I'm Rabbi Ed Feinstein. This is Valley Beth Shalom, live and online. And welcome to all of our friends who are studying with us this afternoon. So we are learning the third section of the Hebrew Bible, which is called Ketuvim. And we're working our way through these important books. And we spent some weeks looking at the book of Proverbs. And the book of Proverbs is the initiation of a set of books that are called collectively by the tradition, the wisdom tradition. The wisdom tradition is, it derives from the collective experience of the Jewish people. It's not based in revelation the way Torah is. It's not based in prophecy. It's based instead on observations about life, about what makes for a life worth living, what makes for a life that's good. And the conventional wisdom tradition hammers home again and again, again and again and again, the perception. It's not even a conviction, it's a perception. It's a perception. This is the way that life is experienced. The perception is that a life of virtue leads to rewards, that doing good, you end up living well. And a life of evil leads to its own self-destruction. That is the conviction of the book of Proverbs, reiterated again and again and again, in the book of Proverbs. Now we turn the page to the next book of the Bible, which is Job. And the book of Job is a very difficult book. It is a very complicated book. It is a mysterious book in many ways. The first thing that makes Job mysterious is that it begins in prose and then switches to poetry. So the first two chapters are prose. Then we get chapters 3 through 42, basically 41, are poetry. And then we switch back to prose for a short ending. And the question is, what's the relationship between the prose and the poetry? It's not inconceivable that the same author wrote in prose and then wrote in poetry, except the problem is that the Job that we meet in the prose section, in the storytelling, in the narrative of the first two chapters, is a very different Job than the Job that we meet right away in the poetry in chapter 3. So right away you have a dissymmetry, a disjointing of these two different literatures and the two different characters and the ideologies, the ideas that are within these characters. In the first two chapters, we are privy to a conversation that takes place in heaven, as it were, between God and an angel called Satan, or in Hebrew, Hasatan. Now, it's important to remember that Hasatan is not, the church lady Satan. That's not what this is. Hasatan, Satan or Satan, is sort of God's alter ego. It's God's conflicted voices. It's the prosecuting attorney in the courtroom. Now, having watched, Law and Order all these years, I mean, the prosecuting attorney is not a bad guy. When I was a kid, I was raised on Perry Mason. They're the prosecuting attorney was a bad guy. But, Sam Waterston has convinced me that prosecutors are actually good guys. But the point is that God is bragging on his friend Job, and the prosecuting angel Satan says, "Yeah, because look what you've given him. You've given him so much. You've given him so much blessing. Remove those blessings and he will curse you like all the other schnooks in the world." And now God should say to him, "No, don't touch my man Job. He's deserved this." But because what the story is doing in this way is investigating, or we call it interrogating, this interesting question. If it's true, as Proverbs tells us, that a life of goodness, a life of virtue leads to rewards, are we virtuous because we are committed to virtue, or are we virtuous because it earns us rewards? Are we following God's ways because we love God and we're loyal to God, or are we following God's ways because God's buying us off? He's bribing us. It's transactional. And that's the contradiction. That's the contradiction in the wisdom tradition's conviction about, or its perception about virtue. So God says, okay, you can do anything you want to him. So in one day, Job loses everything. He loses his family, he loses his wealth. And then in the next iteration, he loses his health. And at the end of chapter 2, he doesn't curse God. He says to his wife, naked I came into the world and naked I return. Nothing changes my conviction that God is loving and good. And God gives and God takes. Blessed be the name of God. And that's the way chapter 2 ends. So as we finish the prose section at the beginning of the book, we are witness to two things. One is Job's deep abiding loyalty to God, even after he loses everything. And two is we discover that his suffering has nothing to do with anything that he did. It's simply a bet that God lost. It's a terrible sort of cynical view of the universe. Albert Einstein once said, God doesn't play dice with the universe. And the book of Job says, oh, yes, he does. Oh, yes, he does. That things happen to us and there's no reason whatsoever. It's not deserved. It's just what God felt like doing that day. And so it's a very sad story, but Job comes out the hero at the end of the story. Then we turn the page and we arrive at chapter 3. And in chapter 3, where we are now in the world of poetry, so if you're keeping score, the prose is black and white and the poetry is in color. Right? The prose is really it's simple words, it's simple images, it's simple grammar. And when we turn to the poetry in chapter 3, it's technicolor, like technicolor language, technicolor grammar, technicolor symbolism. And in that chapter, a different Job emerges. This is a Job who is enraged. This is a Job who is just agonizing. He's in agony over the condition of his existence, and he's enraged, and he throws an accusation toward heaven. The accusation is that there is no moral order, that good does not bring reward and evil does not bring punish because God simply doesn't care. Or worse, God is an enemy. God is an adversary. That's chapter 3. Now, having thrown down that gauntlet, as it were, 3 of Job's friends show up to comfort him. But they can't abide by his accusation that there is no moral order, that God doesn't care, that God is an adversary. They can't abide by his accusation that he is an innocent man who is suffering needlessly undeservedly. They can't abide by that. So what they do is they begin a dialogue. And the next many chapters of the book are a dialogue between Job and his 3 friends. And the way that the book is set up is that each friend speaks and then Job answers. So there's 3 cycles of this. The first cycle, the second cycle, and then the third cycle is truncated. It's very short. The chapters are much shorter, and it's like it's interrupted. And then what happens next is that God will show up and God will offer his own defense. But first we have to do this dialogue. Now, why do you use a dialogue? Think about world literatures and dialogues. When does a world literature use a dialogue? Well, one way to use a dialogue, for example, is the way Plato did it in the Platonic dialogues with Socrates. And what happens in Plato is that he is an educator, Plato is, and he's trying to get us to a certain conclusion. And so he creates the scenario of a conversation between Socrates and the people of Athens that he lives around. And Socrates, using his skill as a reflective philosophical soul, guides them through questions and through examples to arrive at a certain conclusion. So the Republic, for example, begins with the question of what is the just society. It actually begins with the question of what is goodness. What does it mean to have goodness in the world? What is good? How do we know what is good? These dialogues, I think, are different. These dialogues reflect a different thing. So Plato's motivation for employing a dialogue is to mimic a certain educational style. He's trying to reproduce what it would be like to sit and talk with Socrates and have him teach us. I think the book of Job has a different idea, because the question really is, whose voice is being reflected in this? Is Job's voice the voice of the author trying to get us to a conclusion? Are the friend's voice the voice of the author? Where's the author in this? I mean, whose point of view is being reflected here? And perhaps the best answer that I found, the most satisfying answer, there's no answer. I don't know the answer. But the most satisfying suggestion that I found is that neither answer is good. That what happens, one of the reasons you use a dialogue is because you want to be able to project both a way of thinking and its opposite, because neither one is complete, because neither one really captures a satisfying solution to the problem. And by setting them up as a dialogue, you set up a sort of contradiction, a dialectic, a paradox, where you can see why neither answer is correct and why the tension between them might be the place in which the answer is to be found. So let's take a look at that inside. I want to look again, as we did last week, at the first friend. His name is Eliphaz. He's the most articulate of the three. It's Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. Eliphaz is the most articulate and also the most personal. Bildad articulates conventional wisdoms better than anybody else. And Zophar is just pissed off. I mean, he's just angry at Job. So for him, it's really personal. So let's take a look at Eliphaz, okay? And take a look at his accusation. And then I really want to look today at Job's answer, how Job answers him. Okay, so I put this up on the screen. If you happen to have a Bible handy, this is the Jewish Publication Society, the JPS translation, chapter 4. You'll find Job at the end of the Bible, after Psalms and Proverbs, but before the Megillot, before the book of Esther. Eliphaz the Temanite said in response, "If one ventures a word with you, would it be too much? But how can one hold back his words?" Now, that's an interesting introduction. So Job has just given us a long complaint about how miserable he is and how much he wants to die and how unfair God is and how the world doesn't have any fairness in it whatsoever. And it's not quite clear who Job is talking to. Like, he's just fetching. I mean, he's just exploding on his friends and exploding on the world. And Eliphaz shows up and he says, well, excuse me a moment. I know you didn't ask me to do this. You didn't invite me into the conversation, but maybe you'd let me have a word in. Give me a word in edgewise, right? You've encouraged many. You've strengthened falling hands. Your words have kept him from stumbling, from falling. You have braced knees that gave way. But now that it overtakes you, it is too much. It reaches you and you're unnerved. It's not your piety, your confidence, your integrity, your hope. There's two ways to read this. You can read it as an attack. You are always the one telling us that God is good, that the world is just. And now that you're suffering, you don't have that in you anymore? That's one way to read it. I want to suggest a different way. Let's suppose he really is a friend. And what he's trying to say is, maybe you can reach back in your memory to the faith that you once held and allow that faith to bolster you. Because what he's complaining about isn't only his condition. What's bothering Job isn't just that he's miserable. His health is gone, his family's gone, his kids, terrible things have happened to him. He's also complaining that the universe has let this happen. And so Eliphaz shows up and he says, well, you were once so faithful. Could you find that in yourself again? Could you find that in yourself again? And now he's going to articulate the faith. I mean, what is the conventional faith? Think now, what innocent man ever perished? Where have the upright been destroyed? As I've seen it, those who plow evil sow mischief reap them and perish by a blast from God. They perish by a blast of God, are gone with the breath of nostrils. The lion may roar, the cup may howl, but the teeth of the king of beasts are broken. The lion perishes for lack of prey, and its whelps are scattered. What he says to Job is, just as there is a natural order, there is a moral order. just as there is a natural order, that things go according to the orders of nature, there is a moral order. You do good, you get rewarded. You do evil, you get punished. No evil man, no innocent man ever perished. That's not how it works. That's the way the world is. Now, you and I hear this and we say, what are you talking about? I know lots of innocent people that have suffered terribly. But you see, this is what happens when you hold on to a worldview. His worldview, what innocent man ever perished, is not based on facts. It's not an empirical judgment. It's a conviction. And what he's able to do, Eliphaz is able to do, and lots of people that I've met in my life have able to do, is to fit every contradictory fact into the framework of their belief. Right? They fit every contradictory fact into the framework of belief, because for them to give up that belief would be so much more painful, than to hold on, than to exert all of this energy in order to maintain this this kind of a belief. I mean, just give you a rabbi's example. So, occasionally I have to do a funeral service, or I have to visit a family where there's been a terrible tragedy. Young person passes away, child passes away, person who's a wonderful person gets very sick. And someone will say to me, well, Rabbi, isn't it true that he's in a better place now? Or that God meant this for good? Or can't we believe that this is what God wanted and this is right? And I'm always reticent to contradict that. I don't believe that. I don't believe. Because the problem is then that person has a right to be very angry at God for taking their loved one. But you don't contradict it, because it gives them comfort. You understand that that's the only thing they have left in the world, is that conviction that somehow there is a moral order to the world. And losing that conviction would be very, very difficult. Very, very, very difficult for them. That's what Eliphaz sets out to do. Now, let's move on and see how Job answers him. But first, I want to see if there are any questions from our studio audience. So let's take a moment. Yeah, Douglas, you go first. You have to unmute, sir.
Try.
There you go.
It says Eliphaz is a Temanite.
Yeah.
Temanite is Edom, which is Esau, which is Rome, which is...
No. Temanite means a southerner. Teman is Yemen. Today, Teman is Yemen. I don't know what Temanite means here. I never heard of the Temanites. In contemporary Hebrew, Teman is Yemen. It's not Edom. Edom is a different business.
When I Googled it while you were talking, it said it was Emma. It was a southern part of Edom.
Southern. Well, yeah, southern meaning
but it's a southern part of Edom.
Well, but Edom, is like a big place. I mean, so it's not like he's not Roman, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
No, he's and what that exactly means, I don't know. Job isn't Jewish.
Mm-hmm.
So this is not a Jewish story. I mean, he represents all of humanity. So what were you going to say? That he's Roman and therefore he has a different ethic?
I do think Job is Jewish, because I think that the suffering, that Job, is very analogous to 1,800 years of Jewish suffering.
Well, that's one way to read. That's the books in our Bibles. So you could say that at least the lessons of the book belong to us. The question is, what are the lessons of the book, and who does Job represent in the book? The Jewish tradition never identified Job as Jewish. Never identified him as Jewish. And in fact, in the Midrash, he's one of Pharaoh's advisors. He actually is one of the wise men that comes to tell Pharaoh to kill Moses. So the Jewish tradition never accepted him as one of our team. But I don't know what a Temanite is. A southerner. So he comes from Alabama, right? Is it down there in Alabama? We have a saying, something like that. Okay, David, you got something?
Yeah, this is so fascinating now, because I've always looked at the story of Job as wasn't interesting.
Yeah.
And now what it makes me think about is that the dialogue is to draw me into a conversation, is to draw me in.
That's it.
And it's to draw me in with a conversation part with myself.
Mm-hmm.
And part of what you're talking about is, what is my motivation? Is my motivation to get good things in my life, to get a lot of money? But am I going to be a good person because of that? Or what's my motivation? I think that's really, really, really interesting. And
See, David, let me ask you a question, because you have an expertise in this, a professional expertise. In theater, what's the motivation for a writer to present an idea or a concept or a value as a dialogue as opposed to a monologue?
And always, I think what it does is it draws us into to thinking about it, to looking at both sides, to caring about both sides.
Right.
And classic one is Merchant of Venice,
Right.
That's a classic one.
Right. I'm thinking of Iago and Othello, I mean, you think about the great dialogues in Western drama and English drama, Waiting for Godot. I mean, you're trying to deal with a concept that's too sophisticated, it's too nuanced to be captured in a soliloquy. It needs to have the kind of tension that comes with a dialogue, with an argument, with a conversation, right?
Right.
And watch as this theatrically, watch as this escalates. Because what's going to happen over the course of the book of Job is that the dialogues escalate. And that's why the third round, the third cycle, is truncated, because you get the feeling that it explodes. You get the feeling that it explodes. You ever sat at a Jewish, Seder table and had an argument with Uncle Fred? You know that after a while, you just stop. You just say, all right, there's nothing else to say. And that's sort of where that's how the thing ends. And then God shows up. And then God and Job have it out. And but theatrically it works because there's a tension, and you're exactly right. It involves me.
And there is ultimately where it takes me is that it takes that it's not about being victimized. It's not about, it's not about that. It's about, here's what goes on in one's life. Good things happen, bad things happen, things that seem unfair happen. And it's a different context than the first, what you talked about, this first character.
See, so here you have to ask a really very, very interesting question. Does the Job of chapter 3 and 4 and onward, is he the same Job as the chapters 1 and 2? Or are we dealing with two different stories that have been spliced together? See, if you read them as one book, so we know why he's suffering, but he doesn't know why he's suffering, and he's angry. Maybe if you take this as a separate literary unit, we don't know why he's suffering. We don't even know who he is. He just shows up, you see. The chapter 1 and 2 give us a backstory to this that changes the valence of the whole thing. But it could just very well be he's just a guy who's fed up with life. If you start with chapter 3, if chapter 3 were the first chapter of the book, you would know nothing about why he suffers. You just know that he's suffering. And his friend comes and says, all right, you're suffering. I get why you're suffering, but that doesn't mean that the whole world has come apart. There's a moral order to the world. You can accept it. You always taught us that. And the friend...
It's an extreme version. To me, it's an extreme version at this point in the conversation, extreme version of what everybody experiences.
Right, exactly right.
To some extent or another.
Right, he's a cipher for our common human experience. We are all vulnerable, right? The great Ernest Becker once pointed this out. In a famous book called The Denial of Death, which was a joke in Annie Hall, but it's actually a really good book. And Becker says, here's the great paradox of being human. You take something of infinite unique preciousness like the human soul, and you put it in a container which is so common like the human body, and so fragile, so fragile, And so that means that all of us are going to have these moments when we say, oh my God, why me, God? We all have that. Sometimes it's very small. You stub your toe at night on the way to the bathroom and you realize how fragile you are. And sometimes, unfortunately, as we all know, it's very big. But all of us have those moments. And that's what Job is reflecting here. Stanley.
Stan?
Stan.
Yes. Wouldn't you say that Einstein, when he's talking about playing dice for the universe, is talking about a physical universe and has nothing to do with an intervening God one way or another?
Yeah, of
Uh,
course.
uh,
Absolutely.
but once we start an intervening God, now we're back to coming up with our own explanations.
But here's the question, Stan. I'm using as an analogy. We modern people who have a sense of science have an understanding of something called capital N nature, and that nature has patterns. We call them natural laws. They're not really laws. There's no policeman. They're just patterns. One of the patterns that you and I know is called gravity, right? Now, gravity is a pattern in nature which obtains pretty much in all places at all times under all circumstances, right? So here's the question. Are there moral laws like the law of gravity that govern the conduct of life in the world that are also ubiquitous, that are also in all places at all times and all are there such moral laws? Right? Einstein says God doesn't play dice with the universe, meaning that God doesn't mess with the laws of nature. Okay? All right. So what the book of Job is asking us is, are there moral laws? And does God mess with those laws? The first 2 chapters says, yeah, there are moral laws and God messes with them. And then the rest of the book, that's the great question. That's what Eliphaz just said to him. Eliphaz says to him, you know the laws. You taught us the laws. Why are you forgetting that now? No innocent man ever suffered. Okay? That's his perception of the word, not even a conviction. That's what he sees. And when he sees a contradiction to it, he's able to somehow integrate that contradiction into his worldview, because that worldview is so important to him. Now watch what Job does with that worldview. You ready? I want to go back to Job. So meet Job. This is a different Job than we met before. We're going to go down a little bit. Down to chapter 6. Okay, ready? Job said in reply. Job is responding to Eliphaz. If my anguish were weighed, my full calamity laid out on scales, it's a parallelism. That's the way biblical poetry works. You say something and you say the same thing in different words. It would be heavier than the sand of the sea, and that's why I spoke so recklessly. I'm suffering, boys. For the arrows of the Almighty are in me. My spirit absorbs their poison. God's terrors are arrayed against me. He doesn't interpret his sorrows, his problems, as chance. He thinks God's after him. And by the way, that happens. When we have adversity, we tend to personalize. And I remember when the earthquake took place in 1994, we were in the midst of, our house fell down, but there was a little bit left. So we were trying to pack it up and move out of the house. We got red tagged. And every time there would be one of the aftershocks that would roll through the house, my kids would look up to the sky and would go, shut up. It's like you personalize the adversity. So God's doing this to me, right? Does a wild ass bray when he has grass? Does a bull bellow when he has fire? The only reason I'm bellowing, I'm complaining, is because I'm suffering, right? That's my nature, right? Would my request be granted that God gave me what I wished for? Would that God consented to crush me, loosed his hand and cut me off? This would be my consolation as I writhed in unsparing pain, that I did not suppress my words against the Holy One. So God, I asked God to kill me, but he didn't kill me. So you know what? All I have left is fetching. I need to have my say. So Eliphaz said, be quiet and stop complaining. And Job says, I need to have my say. I have a right to have my say, right? What strength have I that I should endure? How long have I lived? Should I be patient? Is my strength the strength of a rock, my flesh bronze? Truly, I cannot help myself. I've been deprived of resourcefulness. He says, I'm failing at this. That's why I'm complaining. A friend owes loyalty to one who fails, though he forsakes the fear of the Almighty. So here, I think he's turning on the friends, and he's saying, this is your idea of comfort? A man's suffering, and you show up and you say, you deserved it. This is what you say at a house of Shiva? This is what you say when someone gets clobbered by life? You come and you tell me it's my own damn fault? My comrades are fickle like a wadi. A wadi is a gully in the desert. And when there's a rainstorm, you have a rush of flood. So in Israel, there are these wadis. and you know not to hike in them, because if there is a sudden downpour, you'll get carried away. So for 1 minute it's dry like the desert, and for 1 minute it's wet and there's a flood. There's no in between. My comrades are like that. They're like a bed on which streams once ran. They are dark with ice, snow obscures them, but when they thaw, they vanish. So he said, where are you? What kind of friends are you, right? Their course twists and turns. They run into the desert and perish. He's talking about the wadi, but he's also comparing that to his friends. He's saying, your arguments are so clever, but when you look at them, they don't mean anything. Like, this is what you're offering me? And then he goes on, caravans from Tema, look at them, processions from Sheba, count them. They are disappointed in their hopes. When they reach the place, they stand aghast. Say, so you are nothing. At the sight of misfortune, you take fright. Instead of standing with me and giving me support and really investigating whether my case against God is a good one, all you can do is parrot these conventional wisdoms. Did I say to you, I need your gift, pay a bribe for me out of your wealth, deliver me from the clutches of my enemy, redeem me from violent men? Did I ask you for any of this? Teach me and I'll be silent. Tell me where I'm wrong. Trenchant, honest words are, but what sort of reproof comes from you? Do you devise words of reproof, but count a hopeless man's words as wind? What kind of guys are you? Where is your support? Where is your consideration of my condition? Why can't you stop parroting your conventional answers to these problems and look at my pain and maybe consider that I might be right? Right? Because what they're doing is defending their beliefs, because absent their beliefs, their worlds fall apart. Right? Would you cast lots over an orphan or barter away a friend? Now be so good as to face me. I will not lie to your face. Relent. Let there not be injustice. Relent. I am still in the right. Is my injustice on my tongue? Can my palate not discern evil? So you show up, and what happens is these friends just keep telling him what they believe. And he says to them, I don't want to know what you believe, because you are not even considering that I'm standing right here. You are looking through me. You are so anxious to protect the beliefs that you came into this conversation with that you're not even considering where I'm standing and what I'm going through. And that's the worst thing that you can do. That's the worst thing that you can do when you confront somebody who's suffering. That's the worst thing. Because now, why are they defending that? Because for them to question that virtue brings rewards means to question that there's a God running the universe. And if you question that there's a God running the universe, that's like questioning gravity. Like, you can't live in that world. It's too chaotic a world. I understand why Eliphaz is holding on to his belief. And I understand why Job is so adamant about fighting back. He says, I got nothing left. This is the only dignity I have left, that I can complain. It's the only dignity I have left. But if the friends were to capitulate and listen to him, what would they have left? What kind of world would they have to? They have to admit that they live in a world which is chaotic. And no human being can admit to a chaotic world. Listen, guys, I don't want to get political, but why is the world filled with conspiracy theories? Because chaos is a lot harder to imagine than weird conspiracy theories, even weird conspiracy theories. Because it's really hard to abide chaos and to say things happen by chance, right? Things happen, even important things sometimes happen because stuff happens. But Barbara Tuchman, the famous historian, wrote a really good book. If you're looking for a good book to read, look, was it the one about folly? In Praise of Folly? Is that what it's called? Pursuit of Folly? What's it, Erica? What's it called? You have to unmute yourself.
I think it's In Praise of Folly.
Yeah, she goes through like the 6 greatest historical mistakes ever made. One of them is the First World War. Yeah, one of them, like, and what she shows is that sometimes historical events, massive historical events, turn on dumb things happening. Right? Dumb things happening. Right? And you know, it happens. And we all want to go find somebody who's in charge. We want to think that there's deep moral meaning to this. And sometimes there is. What's it called?
It's called The March of Folly.
The March of Folly. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And because we all want to believe that the great things that happen in the world happen because somebody designed them, because it was somebody's idea. And we always want to find a villain. It's his fault. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes just dumb stuff happens. But that's really hard to abide, that we live in a world where really, really horrible things can, some guy bought a roast platypus in a wet market in Wuhan, and now the whole world suffers from COVID, right? So there's this whole theory that, no, it was cooked up in a Chinese lab and it was let out. And no, a guy bought what was he buy? He bought a lemur or a monkey or something for dinner. He roasted something you're not supposed to roast and ate it for dinner. And that's why that's the issue. That's the issue. All right, let's do a little bit more of this, okay? Any questions so far? Yeah, Andy, please come on.
So looking back at that discussion, I know that you were taking it that Job was actually focusing on what his friend was trying to say. I was also looking at it as him also saying to the friend, not just to God, where were you when this stuff started happening? Where were you when I supposedly sinned or had these problems? Because I was looking at the discussion. To me, that's what it looked like he was also saying. Hey, if I was doing something wrong, throw me a flag here, give me a little help, let me know so I can correct it. But that wasn't done too. And I think that's also important, because now when you go through the rest of the book, you can understand, hey, wait a second, guys, you weren't here when I needed your help. Where were you?
Yeah. And look, not only that, this because you've worked in the community a long time. Like, even if somebody does deserve what happens to them, you don't go and rub it in. You go hold their hand and say, boy, you look like you're having such a hard time. And you don't say, well, if you've been smoking all those years, it wouldn't have happened to you, or if you've been driving so fast, it wouldn't have happened to you, or you invested in that thing and we told you not to do it. You don't go and say to somebody, I know you're suffering badly, but damn it, you really deserve it. You just don't say that. Now, even if you think it, it's one of the strategies we use to preserve a sense of the meaningfulness of our world when we're facing the suffering of another person, because the suffering of another person affects the way we live in the world. It makes us feel like our world is out of control, which is really hard to abide. And Job is saying, shut up. I didn't ask you for this. I didn't ask you for advice. I didn't ask you for help. And I certainly didn't ask you for your theology. All right, let's take another peek. I wanted to see a little bit more of this, okay? Because now he's going to, I'm sorry, Bert, you're up.
Yeah,
please.
This idea about Job potentially saying to his friends, where were you, reminds me when I was a kid, we used to read the Sunday Funnies, and one of the spreads was called the Cats and Jammer Kids. And one of the key lines in that, when something happened, is they said, you brought it on yourself.
Oh, gosh. And how many times did my mother tell me that? Right.
But, when the friends talk to him, they may be thinking you brought it on yourself. But as you said, compassion and being there means you need to be
circumspect,
empathetic in some way to them.
Yeah, right.
Behind that is you brought it on yourself.
Because you brought it on yourself gives me, as the observer, a sense that my world is still intact, it's orderly, and it distances me from the person who's suffering, so I feel safer standing there. Okay? I speak a lot in front of cancer groups because I'm a cancer survivor. Very, very lucky. And I give lots of talks. And one of the things I say to people, tell me what you're suffering through. And people will say, for example, they'll tell me a thing. I'll say, I'm writing a book called The 100 Dumbest Things People Tell You When You Have Cancer. and it's going to be a good book. It, to me, somebody who is, which is so, ideal of excuses, right? It's yours and not mine. Admit that I live in a world which is so damn fragile that a person who is healthy one day could be, yeah, that's a problem. That's a problem. So let's take another look. Yeah, I'm sorry, Erica, please.
I didn't hear almost everything you said because you froze.
Oh, I'm so sorry. It's really frightening for some people to be in the presence of someone who has something like cancer, which is very deadly. And so what we tend to do, what sometimes people do, is distance themselves. And you distance yourself by coming up with all kinds of stuff. This is your genetics, not my genetics. This is a result of your behavior, not my behavior. And it's a way of, and then sometimes not even verbal distancing. People who have cancer will tell me, I don't know why my friends don't want to go have lunch. So I used to have these friends that we used to go to lunch all the time. And all of a sudden, now that I'm wearing this bandana because I lost my hair through chemotherapy, nobody wants to take me out to lunch. Nobody wants to come over. They think it's contagious. It's not contagious physically. I think we're having internet problems, yeah? I think we're having some internet issues here. I'm sorry. It's not contagious physically. It's contagious spiritually or morally or psychologically, and that becomes the problem. I think we're having some internet problems today, guys. I'm really sorry. Right? So let's do this. Let's stop here, and next week I'd like to begin again. I want to go through Job's answers to his friends and really explore his case against God and his case against the friends. And the question that you're going to keep asking is, I understand why he's saying this stuff. I don't understand why anybody included this in the Bible, because it's so contrary to the religious convictions and the moral perceptions of the rest of the Bible. I understand the book of Proverbs, which tells me that virtue brings rewards. That's a good religious idea. That's something we all learn in Sunday school. But here you have a guy who walks out on center stage and says to us, no, it doesn't. The world is random and bad things happen all the time. Why was that included in Scripture? And that's the question I want to take up next time. Okay? Let me wish you all a really, really good week. Take really, really good care of yourself. If you're qualified, go get the damn shot so we can all be together one day soon, right? And if you haven't been able to get the shot or you got it already, I recommend chocolate ice cream. It won't protect you from the COVID, but damn it, it'll distract you for a little while. So take good care. You have my prayers. Everybody stay well.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Stay well.
God is Friday.
Good to see all of you. 12:30 Wednesdays, we're on, okay?
Thank you.